The process server shoved a thick envelope into my hand and walked away without a word. I tore it open right there on the porch. It wasn't a fine. It was a lawsuit from my own parents. They were suing me for $2 million. The document claimed I had stolen my business from my brother, Derek, and demanded I transfer half my shares and resign immediately. Before I tell you what I found when I dug into their financial records, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I slid the deadbolt home and leaned back against the door, my legs suddenly feeling like water. I took a breath, walked to the kitchen island and spread the documents out. Every page was a testament to a delusion my family had been building for 28 years. I am 24 years old. I own a software company that specializes in automated logistics. I built it from a laptop I bought at a pawn shop. But according to this lawsuit, I was a thief who had pilfered the genius of my older brother, Derek. I read the timeline they had fabricated. It was almost impressive in its audacity. They claimed Derek had invented my core algorithm during a family dinner 3 years ago. I remembered that dinner. Derek had spent 2 hours talking about how he was going to revolutionize the blockchain with vibes. He didn't write code. He didn't know Python from a Python. But my parents, Linda and Robert, nodded along, mesmerized by his buzzwords. That was the pattern of our lives. When Derek wanted to start a crypto hedge fund, my parents didn't ask for a business plan. They took out a second mortgage on their home. They handed him $450,000. He burned it in 6 months on a downtown office suite and luxury client dinners. He said he needed to look successful to be successful. When the market crashed, he blamed the government. My parents blamed bad luck. While Derek was playing CEO with their retirement fund, I was living in a studio apartment with no heat. I ate instant noodles for dinner 5 nights a week. I refused to ask them for a dime because I knew the answer would be no. I coded for 18 hours a day. I built my client base one cold call at a time. I didn't have an office. I had a closet and a Wi-Fi connection I stole from the coffee shop downstairs. And now, looking at the legal demand for 50% of my company, I realized something that turned my fear into cold, hard rage. This wasn't just about greed. It was about survival. My parents weren't just evil, they were desperate. They had bet their entire lives on the golden child. They had poured every asset, every drop of equity and every hope into Derek. If Derek was a failure, then they were destitute. They had nothing left. They were facing a retirement of poverty because they had backed the wrong horse. Psychologically, they couldn't handle that truth. They couldn't look in the mirror and admit they had thrown $500,000 into a fire. So they invented a new reality. In their minds, Derek had to be a genius. And if he was a genius who was broke, it must be because someone stole his brilliance. That someone was me. They weren't suing me to get rich. They were suing me to validate their own bad investments. They were doubling down on their delusion because the alternative was admitting they had destroyed their own lives. I looked at the signature on the affidavit. My mother's handwriting. She was testifying that she saw me take notes while Derek spoke. It was a lie, but to her it was a necessary lifeline. I didn't cry. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. They wanted a war? They wanted to claim I was a thief? Fine. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother. I was going to give them one chance to walk away before I burned their fantasy to the ground. I placed my phone on the kitchen counter and pressed the speaker button. My hands were steady now. The fear had evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I wasn't calling to beg. I was calling to give them one final exit ramp before I drove them off a cliff. Linda answered on the first ring. Her voice wasn't angry. It was terrifyingly calm, the tone of a parent scolding a toddler who had drawn on the walls. She told me to stop being dramatic. She said they didn't want to ruin me, they just wanted what was fair. She said Derek had been generous enough to offer me a retention package if I stepped down as CEO quietly. I cut her off. I told her that I wrote every line of code in that platform. I told her Derek couldn't even open the developer console, let alone design the architecture. I gave her an out. I told her if they dropped the lawsuit by 5 o'clock, I wouldn't countersue for malicious prosecution. She laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound. She told me I was remembering things wrong. She said we all knew I was just the typist, the pair of hands that transcribed Derek's brilliance. Then she dropped the hammer. She said they had found the contract. My blood ran cold. There was no contract. There had never been a contract. I asked her what she was talking about. She told me to check my messages. A moment later, a photo appeared on my screen. I stared at it, trying to comprehend the sheer stupidity of what I was seeing. It was a picture of a cocktail napkin. A cheap, white bar napkin stained with a brown ring of scotch. On it, someone had drawn 3 crude boxes connected by arrows, a flowchart a 5-year-old could have made. Underneath the drawing, in scrawled block letters, it read, Derek owns 50%. Caitlin does the coding. and at the bottom there was a signature. My signature. Or rather, a signature that looked like someone had practiced my name for 10 minutes and then signed it with a heavy hand. I zoomed in on the image. The date was scribbled in the corner. 3 years ago. The night of the dinner. The silence on the line was heavy. My mother asked if I remembered now. She said they were going to submit this to the court in the morning as proof of our partnership. I didn't answer immediately. My brain was shifting gears, grinding from defensive to offensive. This wasn't just a frivolous lawsuit anymore. This wasn't a family dispute. This was forgery. This was fabrication of evidence. By submitting this to a court, they were crossing the line into perjury and fraud. They were handing me a loaded gun and asking me to pull the trigger. I asked her one last question. I asked if she was willing to swear under oath that she saw me sign that napkin. He didn't hesitate. He said yes. He said she watched me do it. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't scream. I just tapped the red icon and ended the call. The bridge was burned. They weren't my parents anymore. They were liabilities. And I knew exactly how to liquidate them. I set the phone down. The screen went black and with it the last vestige of my role as the dutiful daughter vanished. I didn't cry. Tears were a luxury for people who had safety nets. Instead, I opened my laptop and felt a familiar cold shift in my brain. It was the same sensation I got when I was hunting a bug in a million lines of code. The emotion drained away, replaced by pure forensic calculation. My parents were suing me with a high-end lawyer. That cost a retainer of at least $10,000 with billable hours racking up by the minute. But I knew their finances. Derek had incinerated their savings. They had taken out a second mortgage to fund his crypto disaster. So where was the money coming from? I logged into the county clerk's public records database. It took me 3 minutes to find the answer. A new lien had been filed against their house just 2 weeks ago. It wasn't a bank loan. It was a short-term bridge loan from a private lending firm called Ironclad Capital. I researched Ironclad. They weren't a bank, they were sharks. They offered high-interest cash to desperate people with equity, expecting a payout in 6 months or they foreclosed. My parents had gambled the roof over their heads on the certainty that they would crush me in court and use my company's assets to pay off the loan. I stared at the screen. This was the weak point. This was the thermal exhaust port. I checked my own accounts. Between my personal savings and my business's retained earnings, I had liquidity. It was my entire safety net, every dollar I had scraped together for the last 4 years. If I used it, I would be operating on fumes. If I lost the lawsuit, I would be destitute. I didn't hesitate. I picked up the phone and called the number listed for Ironclad Capital. I didn't identify myself as the defendant. I identified myself as an investor interested in purchasing a distressed asset. Predatory lenders don't care about family drama. They care about liquidity. They viewed my parents' loan as high risk. I offered them an immediate cash buyout of the note, principal plus a quick profit for them, in exchange for the assignment of the mortgage. The transfer took 48 hours. I wired the money. My bank balance dropped to nearly zero. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs. But when the email confirmation landed, the terror was replaced by a dark, heavy satisfaction. I held the paper. I wasn't just the defendant anymore. I was their creditor. If they missed a single payment, and I knew they would because they were pouring everything into legal fees, I owned their house. But I needed more. I needed to bury the lie about the napkin. I opened my terminal and pulled up the Git repository for my original codebase. Git is a version control system. It records every change, every line of code, and every deletion with a timestamp that is mathematically impossible to fake without breaking the encryption chain. I filtered the logs for the dates surrounding that alleged dinner 3 years ago. I found the commit history for the core architecture. It was written over a 72-hour sprint. I remembered those days. I hadn't slept. I hadn't eaten. Then I opened a new tab and pulled up Derek's Instagram. I scrolled back 3 years. There it was. While I was committing thousands of lines of code to the repository, Derek was live-streaming a bender in Cabo. He had posted photos of himself doing shots at a beach bar, time-stamped to the exact minute I was writing the database schema. He physically could not have been drawing flowcharts on a napkin in our dining room. He was 2,000 miles away, passing out in a hotel lobby. I took screenshots. I compiled the metadata. I had the financial noose and the digital smoking gun. But I couldn't just walk in and show them. If they knew what I had, they might retreat. They might claim it was a mistake. I needed them to commit. I needed them to lie on the record in front of a court reporter where it would become a crime. I opened my email client and composed a message to their lawyer. I didn't write it like a CEO. I wrote it like a terrified 24-year-old girl who was out of her depth. Dear Mr. Sterling, I am overwhelmed. I don't want to fight my family. I am scared of losing everything. Please, can we meet for mediation? I am willing to discuss terms. I just want this to stop. It was the art of playing dead. In nature, predators get careless when they think the prey has given up. I pressed send, leaned back in my chair and waited for them to come in for the kill. The conference room smelled of stale coffee and unearned confidence. My parents, Linda and Robert, sat on one side of the mahogany table, looking like monarchs holding court. Derek sat between them, leaning back in his chair with a smugness that made my skin crawl. Their lawyer, Mr. Sterling, a man whose suit cost more than my first car, tapped a pen against a legal pad, looking bored. I sat alone. I had brought no one. I wanted them to think I was isolated. I wanted them to think I was breaking. We appreciate you coming to your senses, Caitlin, my father said, his voice dripping with paternal disappointment. We don't want to hurt you. We just want Derek to have what is rightfully his. Mr. Sterling slid a document across the table. It was a settlement agreement. It ceded 50% of my equity to Derek and installed him as co-CEO. Beside it lay the photo of the cocktail napkin, the smoking gun they were so proud of. Before I sign, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, keeping my eyes on the table. I need to understand. Derek, how did you come up with the architecture? Specifically the encryption handshake protocol in the backend. It's the most complex part of the system. I've always struggled to explain it to investors. Derek straightened up. He shot a glance at Sterling, then at our parents. This was his moment. He cleared his throat. Well, honestly, Kate, it just came to me, he said, speaking with the unearned authority of a man who watches too many TED Talks. I knew we needed blockchain logic to verify the logistics chain. The encryption handshake is basically a decentralized ledger validation. I drew it out for you on that napkin because you couldn't visualize the nodes. I nodded slowly. So, you designed the encryption handshake using blockchain logic on the night of November 12th, 3 years ago? Yes, Derek said. Exactly. And you're stating this for the record? I am. Mr. Sterling looked at me, impatient. Ms. Mitchell, is this relevant? We have the napkin. It is, I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. I opened it and spun it around so the screen faced them. Because there is no encryption handshake protocol. I made that name up 30 seconds ago. The system uses a standard SQL database. The air left the room instantly. Derek froze, his mouth half open. But that's not the problem, I continued, my voice hardening, shedding the fear like a snake shedding skin. The problem is the timeline. I clicked a key. 2 windows appeared side by side on the projector screen I had quietly connected to. On the left was the Git commit history, the immutable digital ledger of my code. On the right was Derek's Instagram feed. This is the code repository, I said, pointing to the timestamps. The core kernel was written in a 72-hour sprint between November 11th and November 14th. Thousands of lines of code, timestamped to the second. I pointed to the right side of the screen. And this is Derek's Instagram. November 12th. Timestamped location, Cabo San Lucas. Here is a video of him doing body shots at a bar called Al Squid Row. Here he is passing out in the hotel lobby at 3 a.m. I looked at Mr. Sterling. Unless Derek figured out how to telepathically code complex algorithms from a Mexican resort while blacked out on tequila, he is lying. And that napkin? It's a forgery. Which makes this meeting an attempt to use the legal system to commit fraud. Mr. Sterling went very still. He looked at the screen. He looked at the date on the napkin photo. Then he looked at Derek, who was now turning a sickly shade of gray. Sterling didn't yell. He didn't argue. He simply closed his folder with a sharp snap that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. He stood up and picked up his briefcase. Mr. Sterling, my mother asked, her voice shaking. Where are you going? I am withdrawing as counsel effective immediately, Sterling said coldly. I will not suborn perjury. Do not contact my office again. He left. The door clicked shut, crushing the room into silence. Caitlin, my father stammered, flushed. We can explain. Derek just confused the dates. Stop, I said. I'm not finished. I slid a single document across the table, the mortgage assignment. You don't have a lawyer anymore, I said. But you do have a creditor. My father read. Confusion drained into horror. You took out a high-interest bridge loan to fund this lawsuit, I said. You used the house as collateral. You bet you could steal my company before the note came due. I leaned in. I bought the debt. I own the note. And since you defaulted this morning, because you paid a lawyer who just walked out, I'm calling it due. My mother gasped. You own our house. I own the debt, I corrected. And since you can't pay, you have 30 days to vacate. I packed up and walked out, adrenaline surging. I had won, but cornered animals don't think. They bite. At the elevators, I heard the conference room door slam open. Caitlin. Derek tackled me into the wall. He wasn't trying to hurt me, he was trying to erase me. He grabbed my wrist, forcing my thumb toward my phone. Unlock it. Delete the cloud. He twisted my arm, frantic, hysterical. An extinction burst. The final violence of someone who's lost control. Then a massive hand seized the back of his neck. That's enough. Mr. Vance, the security contractor I'd hired days earlier, slammed Derek to the floor and zip-tied him. You are detained for assault, Vance said calmly. Police are en route. Derek sobbed as they dragged him away. The cameras had captured everything. He pleaded guilty. Fraud. Perjury. Assault. 18 months. My parents lost the house. I didn't keep it. I liquidated it and used the proceeds to start a scholarship fund. Laptops and internet for engineering students building futures from nothing. 3 months later, the lawsuits were gone. The restraining orders permanent. The noise had stopped. I opened the folder labeled Evidence. Then I deleted it. I didn't need proof anymore. I closed my laptop and looked out at the city. The future finally felt like it belonged to me. Have you ever had to become the villain in someone else's story just to survive?